The government is splashing the cash, spending £15 billion on new transport projects across England. But there's a political row because the previous government say they were going to do it anyway. We will discuss what's going on in this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
And it's Chris at Westminster.
And Faisal in the studio.
But mentally, we're in a factory that makes buses in Rochdale, because that's where Rachel Reeves was doing her speech.
Or maybe at Birmingham City's football ground, because that's where she went this afternoon.
Oh, so she's been in lots of places where she's splashing the cash.
Yeah.
Chris, before we dive into the details of what she was saying, a lot of people will probably remember this Rachel Reeves speech, if they saw it, for the facial expressions of some of the workers behind her.
Yeah.
Not always positive.
No, and the Conservatives on social media were having some fun with this. And it's curious because I regularly find myself in, factories or whatever it might be, warehouses, observing these kind of speeches. And what happened today, the same thing that happened the other day with the Prime Minister in Glasgow, where they're in a workplace and there's a kind of circle of people around them, including quite a lot of the workforce stood behind them. So you're watching a speech whilst looking at the back of the head of the person delivering it. And the thing is, and this happened in Glasgow the other day, where the Prime Minister was reading off two giant screens at the back of the circle of people, which are an auto cue. So if you're stood behind him, particularly if you're not used to the kind of choreography of these things, the temptation, because they're right in front of you in massive text, is to read the auto cue. And so you could be stood behind the politician, be a sentence or two ahead of the words that are coming out of their mouth. And also, your eyes are probably darting back and forth as well, because these are huge screens.
And also, at these workplaces, you don't know if you're working. You don't know who the VIP is because of security. They don't tell you to the last second. And so I've been to places where they thought it was going to be like somebody they were really excited to see, like the King or Beyonce or somebody, and then it's only Rachel Reeves.
I'm amazed.
Or the Prime Minister.
I'm amazed these things don't go wrong more often, given that. And actually, hats off to some of these heroes in the background for the incredibly
and for standing up for so long. My problem with these things is that they always when you see the wide shot, so like the really zoomed out shot, you can see all these brand new buses that have been made, and then you see like the 12 blokes, mostly blokes, stood between the buses and Rachel Reeves, and then for the whole speech you don't see the buses, so it's like actually the people are in the way of the good stuff, which is the buses. And it's like, remember when Theresa May used to do all her Brexit speeches in places like Florence and in beautiful chapels, and they just put like a grey government backdrop, and you're like, well, why did you go to that chapel and then just stood in front of a grey wall? Anyway,
did you do the same in Greenwich at one point as well?
They do it all over the place. Yeah. Anyway, if any spin doctors are listening,
or maybe that was Boris Johnson. Anyway, sorry.
Right, Chris. Before we dive into the details of the spending announcement, just put us in the kind of the fiscal calendar, as it were.
Absolutely. This is like the advent calendar that the likes of you, me and newscasters and Faisal would delight in sort of opening the doors of. So here we go. So we had the budget last autumn. Then we had the spring statement a couple of months ago. And what we're getting next Wednesday is the spending review, which is the government's plans for spending across the various Whitehall departments for the next handful of years, pretty much, now till the next election. And what they've been doing over the last few months is what they're calling a zero-based review, which hadn't happened for years and years, where every department goes through every line of expenditure and then goes into a discussion, sometimes protracted discussion, with the Chancellor over what they can get, basically, and what their money and their budgets are going to look like. And what we're now in is the countdown to next Wednesday. Some of the stuff next Wednesday will be quite tricky for the Chancellor. So what she was doing today, on Wednesday, was a blitz of this zipping about Rochdale, Birmingham, etc., and these big, longer-term so-called capital projects, which I guess are easier for a Chancellor to outline than when you're having to acknowledge that a particular budget in a particular department is going south.
And Faisal, we got a little bit of a sort of a rebrand from Rachel Reeves of her fiscal rules as not something that she kind of wants to be imposing on the public finances, but something that's imposed on Britain as a whole by the people that lend our government money.
Yeah, they're not great fans of this term self-imposed rules, but I think it's important to clarify that the rules are a choice. I guess that in a wider perspective, you can argue that if there were no rules or there was no fiscal discipline, well, there's no choice over that. Interest rates would go up and the pound would slump, and we've had sort of experiences of that. So I think that was the sort of broader philosophical point she was trying to make. But yeah, you're right. It sort of signalled a little bit of a sort of rowback from just how kind of iron those rules are, like unarguable, ironclad. These sorts of words. One does wonder when one thinks about the defence announcement too, about all of the pressures on spending, the promises not to raise tax, growth sort of trundling along. Something's got to give by the end of the year, and there's a big argument coming with sort of, I don't know, Chris will be better cited on this, sort of slightly restive backbenchers thinking. Could it be the rules?
Let's talk about what was given today by Rachel Reeves, which is £15.6 billion of spending on transport projects in England. Things like a new mass transit system in West Yorkshire. West Yorkshire's getting £2.1 billion of that. There's going to be an expansion of the tram network in Manchester, new tram routes in Birmingham as well, and basically all over England. What's going on here, Chris, with this particular announcement today?
So a couple of things. One, it's leaning into two elements of Rachel Reeves' kind of economic strategy. One is focusing on this longer term capital spending, which they believe is worth it and good for the country, but worth it as well in a route towards economic growth, albeit in the medium to long term. Then this tweaking of the Treasury's guidance, its rules, it's known as the Green Book, which sets out how those in Whitehall should measure the economic effectiveness or otherwise of a particular bit of government spending. And the critique of the existing rules goes like this. It says the temptation is to spend money in the most economically productive parts of the country because you get a better rate of return. And therefore, so goes the critique, there has been a disproportionate amount of money spent in London and the southeast of England. So those rules are being tweaked. We're seeing an element of that in the playing out of this splurge of money in the north of England, the Midlands and the West Country. And then Rachel Reeves leaning into this, it was described to me today as a war on graphs. They are very conscious that next week there'll be a lot of tables and spreadsheets and indeed graphs, and some of them will paint a picture that is rather tricky and points to the challenges that Faisal was speaking to a moment or two ago. So what they want to do is go to places and point at things that are tangible and are real, even if they're many, many years off, with the aim that, you get spades in the ground within the next handful of years. I mean, clearly it's going to be a while beyond that before you can buy a ticket for an extended metro or tram or bus project. But that's what's going on here.
Which neatly brings us to a conversation I had a couple of hours earlier on Wednesday with Kim McGuinness, who is the Labour mayor in the North East. That means she covers Durham, Northumberland, Gateshead, Newcastle, North Tyneside, South Tyneside and Sunderland. And the goodies she got today, which all added up to £1.85 billion of investment. But one of the big things that will let her do is to extend the metro to Washington in Tyne and Wear. And so here is how Kim McGuinness was celebrating. Well, she was celebrating by chatting to Newscast. Kim, Madam Mayor, hello.
Hello, hi. Thanks for having me.
So explain to us what you've got today and what you're going to spend it on.
Well, we have had £1.85 billion of transport in the North East. That is more than we've ever had. And having been overlooked for a really long time, we're pretty delighted. The major thing for us is we're now able to expand our metro to Washington. That's the fourth largest town in this country without access to a train. So that is huge for our region, and it unlocks loads of potential when it comes to jobs and houses. But we're also bringing our buses back under public control, integrating our network, looking at how we improve our roads, public safety on public transport, which is a massive thing for us, and a whole range of projects that will make a massive difference to people as we're creating opportunity across our region.
But it's the metro line that's got all the attention, because that's the big shiny new thing. How long will it take to build?
Well, I'm pretty impatient, and I think I've proven that in my time as mayor. We've announced this within a year, so I'm pretty delighted. I wanted to see it completed by 2033, which seems a long way in the future, but it is a massive infrastructure project, and it's the first time we've expanded our metro in nearly 30 years. So it's big news for the region today. I understand why it's taken all the limelight, and we're really, really glad because it's something that the region's wanted for ages.
And is this money from the Treasury paying for the whole project and it's ready to go now, or do you actually have to raise some more money from other sources?
So we have got enough from Treasury to pay for this project. However, what I think is that we need to start to look at how we deliver these projects differently. And as we're thinking about building that really important metro line, we also want to create jobs along the route. I think the thing that Washington is so famous for is Nissan. It's where the Nissan plant is. And there's a huge opportunity for more manufacturing jobs, for thousands of houses. And so I want to see private investment in this project. And the money from Treasury will help us to leverage that in. So we can do it. However, I think that there's a better way to do it if we're looking at that public-private partnership and delivering it alongside the private sector too.
How do you actually convince the Treasury that economically and financially it's a good return on their investment? Because you're having to sort of speculate about the future, and you presumably have to make some assumptions about what might happen to make the case.
Yeah, so we've had quite an extensive business case process, which is, a boring way of saying that's exactly what we've been doing, is working out what does this offer us. As I said, Washington's the fourth biggest town in the country without access to a train. We've seen in other parts of the country when you connect places up, the Elizabeth line is the crucial example that everybody uses all the time, that it does open up opportunity. And so you can see from its location with Nissan and a range of other manufacturing facilities down there that there's opportunity for a huge amount of growth when it comes to jobs. But also we've got very ambitious house building targets across the country and in this region. And this sits on the perfect strip of land to be able to really do that, to build a lot of houses. So that the transport infrastructure becomes about more than just A to B, more than just Newcastle to Washington. It actually becomes about, growth. It becomes about opportunity. It becomes about housing and more than one thing. And so I don't find that argument difficult to make. And I don't think that Rachel Reeves finds it difficult to conceive of the fact that it clearly is a growth project. And you can see that in the funding that we've seen, not just here, but elsewhere today.
Now, what's your take on this kind of political back and forth with the Conservatives today about whether any of this is new? Because they say they had this thing called the CRSTS2, which is the Sustainable Transport Fund, that they announced back in 2023. And if you go back on the old.gov.uk website, you can see that the Northeast, your region, got allocated 1.85 billion when Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. So what's your take on whether this is new or not?
Well, my take is they can say it's not new all they want, but did they deliver the money? No, they didn't. And it's taken
that's because it was coming
now.
In the future, and we're now in the future. The future's now.
But they never confirmed it. They never accounted for it. The money was never there. And that was one of the things that I think the Prime Minister and the Chancellor were pretty clear about when they came into government, that the financial inheritance had gaps all over the place. That this money had been announced, but it hadn't been allocated from anywhere. And so this is this government working with mayors who have had to put really convincing cases about why these are growth projects, about how important this is to our regional and national missions across, and we're delivering. And I'm really, really pleased to see it, because a region like mine has just not had this kind of investment now for a very, very long time. I could say 15 years, but if I'm being honest, it's longer than that. And now we're able to really start getting going on major projects like the Metro.
And we talked about the business case for the metro expansion. There's been a lot of talk about how the Treasury is going to rewrite its own rules for judging those business cases for future projects, the so-called Green Book. I've never quite understood actually what they would change about it so that actually more projects in your patch get the go-ahead. I mean, what can you tell me some tweaks that they could make next week?
Well, I sort of think the Green Book sometimes has been used as an excuse, hasn't it, for not funding projects, where you kind of get somebody standing in front of something and saying, it's just not value for money. And I don't buy that, actually. If you continue to overinvest in one part of the country, then of course it will create a return in that part of the country. If you continue to not invest in a different part of the country, then the same will happen. You will not get the return. And I feel like that's what we've seen for decades here in the Northeast. And so I would say rip it up, start again, and be really clear that this is about delivering for communities, delivering for people. I really believe that we can get growth in all parts of this country. And I think that investment in the Northeast, investment in the North more generally is great value for money, and also is proving where it's already been done to pay dividends. You can see that from the growth that Manchester is seeing year on year. We can do that with the right investment. I think that argument's cutting through, which is why we're starting to see this money flow now in a way that it simply wasn't before. But I really do hope this is just the start, because there is so much potential here, so many opportunities. I mean, I would say this is the best place in the world. It's my job to say that. I really, really believe it. Other mayors will tell you differently. But honestly, the opportunity here is massive, and now we just need the investment.
What's your next dream project?
Oh, I've got so many. I would like to see, I would like to see us be able to take that metro line that we're about to expand all the way into County Durham. That's called the Leamside line. That is, even more opportunity for homes and jobs, and a new route all the way through County Durham, which relieves capacity on the East Coast main line. So I think that's crucially important. But here in our region, we're really focused on offshore wind, on energy security, on being the home of the green energy revolution. The other thing that we've done today is launch a carbon and nature offsetting program. So we're really ambitious here. We want to create jobs in these sectors in a way that we once had in coal mining and shipbuilding. And that is revolutionary for the people of our region. So we're getting on with it. It's exciting times here in the Northeast.
How many more billions would you need for that other extension of the metro?
Well,
that sounds like a big deal to me.
Yeah, no, it is. It's for the expansion of the rest of the Leamside line. We think that the project would cost around $1 billion, but we need to do the work on that, and that's exactly what we're gonna keep on doing and keep pushing, because these things are really important for our region, but they're critical national infrastructure. These are the things that unlock the potential on the railways. And as we move towards a publicly controlled railway, which I think is great news for passengers, it's great news for growth and for businesses, we need to start thinking about how we expand the railway in a way that we just haven't been able to for years. We've had the HS2 debacle, and now we're starting to see some transport projects really come through to make a big difference. But our ambitions have to go so much further than just transport, although obviously that is the theme of the day, isn't it?
They're talking about the metro. Is it true that there's an existing metro station where the platform needs to be raised by 4 inches for the new trains, but it's taken 5 years to do it, and it still hasn't happened?
I couldn't name that platform.
Maybe it's not on your route to work.
This might be one of those embarrassing things where somebody watches this or comes to me and says, "Yes, it's this one," and I have to eat my words, but I can't name that.
Okay.
We've got new metro trains incoming though, and they're pretty transformational. Our metro
Hasn't there been a delay though? Wasn't there a bit of a delay because they didn't work or something?
There was a bit of a delay, and we're overcoming that now and rolling them out pretty quickly. But those metro trains, honestly, I've just celebrated a landmark birthday last week, right? And they are older than me. So that tells you how old our metros are. And it affects performance, but the new ones are just so lovely, and they're safe, and they're bright, and they're comfortable, and they're quiet. And so the quicker we can roll that out, as I said, I'm dead impatient, the better. And, connecting up that transport network so that people can make the choice to leave their car at home, that's great for us, and we're making good progress.
Yeah, and just while we've got you, a few other things that are floating around in the news today. Rachel Reeves made it very clear that the threshold for the means test for the winter fuel payment is going to go up so that more people will get it. And there'd been other options for how you could get more people to have winter fuel payment, but it seems like they've gone for the increasing the threshold of the means test, and it will come in time for this winter. Where do you think a good level is? What's the threshold at which a pensioner should be no longer entitled to the winter fuel payment?
And I think we need to be looking at fuel poverty. I think this is a good thing. It's clear that they want to use the evidence to raise the threshold. I'll leave that in the hands of government to work out, what that level needs to be. But we shouldn't have people uncomfortable. And so this is to me is good news. I think it's a good move to make that decision.
But I think everyone can agree that, okay, millionaires shouldn't be getting the winter fuel payment. But where'd you draw the line? Is it a pensioner who has an income of £20,000 a year? Maybe they could still get it?
Honestly, I think Treasury need to use the evidence on what is comfortable for people to be able to earn and still feel like they can heat their home and put food on their table and do all the things that everybody should be able to do through the whole of their life course. But crucially, they should be able to do when they're older. So I want to see an evidence-based decision. And I think that's the most important thing. I think me plucking a figure out of the air wouldn't be any more useful than anybody else doing it. And so I think raising it's important. I think making sure that those who are entitled to pension credits need to be enrolled. We need to help people to do that. You know, in a world where too many people don't have necessarily access to the technology that we need, I think that's really important. But, you know, making sure that people are comfortable and nobody's is sitting in poverty. We've really prioritised child poverty in our region. I think that's really important as well. But yeah, making sure pensioners are comfortable is crucial.
And if Rachel Reeves announces a new threshold for the means test, and you personally think it's still too low, I mean, would you be comfortable calling her out? Because of course you've got your own mandate there in the Northeast. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, I'm not responsible for benefit payments of any sort, but yeah, I think we do sometimes disagree. We have to, and that is the thing about mayors and government that we are seeing today. Really importantly, we're seeing the benefit of having a strong cohort of delivering Labour mayors working with the Labour government to drag money into the North and the Midlands, of course, in a way that it hasn't been before. And at the same time, sometimes we have to make the case for why things should be done differently. And I think a lot of us have done that effectively in different ways for different things.
Do you think the two-child... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say what's important to me is that I do feel like we're listened to. And it has felt like for a long time that hasn't been the case. But the relationship between mayors and government is so different now from what it was with the previous government.
Well, I mean, your job didn't exist before.
Mine didn't. But my colleagues will talk openly about how different the relationship is now. You know, for me as a new mayor to be able to walk through the doors of Downing Street on the second or third day, I can't remember, second or third day of a Labour government, and be taken seriously and talking about devolution and why we need more power into the regions and how that's a massive part of the plan for this government. That's transformational. But what that comes with is the ability for us to speak up for our area in a way that is region first and party second. And I think Keir Starmer himself has said country first, party second. I think everybody understands that that's where we are as mayors.
Yeah, though I wonder if it's country first, region second, party third, or whether it's region first, country second, party third.
Oh, you put the two together. It depends who you ask, but I would say region first, party second.
Okay.
And everything that we're doing in the regions is of benefit to the country, particularly when we're talking about this growth agenda and infrastructure. It's if we don't have successful, thriving regions, then we'll never get that ambitious growth target. We'll never reach the house building targets. We'll never unlock those opportunities. And I think this government sees that. And I think, we're here flying the flag. I would say for the Northeast, others for their own areas, but, particularly for the North, I think in general.
Do you think the cap on families with more than 2 children receiving some benefits should be lifted so that more children can receive them?
Yeah, I mean, I've been pretty clear. I'd like to see that cap lifted. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that anybody in government wants it there. I think it was a conservative decision to put that cap in place. The financial circumstances are challenging. I understand that, but I also think the benefit of lifting that many children out of poverty, the benefit that has to them when it comes to fairness, when it comes to opportunity, because what we know is that the gap between poverty and opportunity is massive, and this is about, as I said, fairness and about the fact that we just shouldn't be in a position where kids are growing up in poverty. But it is also about our economy. It's about having a great workforce fit for the future with the opportunity that they rightfully deserve. And it's much more difficult to have that if you are below the poverty line. So here in the region, we've got the first child poverty reduction unit anywhere in the country. We'll be setting out some really ambitious measures that we're going to try out regionally to try and reduce poverty and improve people's lives and alleviate that poverty at the same time as preventing it. And, I want to see more of that at a national level. But what I would say is that when you had a conversation about child poverty under the last government, they just wouldn't even admit that it was a problem. And at times you even heard people going on the airwaves and saying, it's getting better, when it very clearly wasn't, and certainly not in a region like mine. Whereas now there is a child poverty task force, there is action being taken in government. People are at least putting together the solutions. And so I think that's one thing in a suite of measures that could be done, along with things like, the breakfast clubs, which I just think are a transformational policy that we need in this country.
And are you on board with the changes to disability benefits that are coming down the pipeline?
As what we've been able to do in the region, and I know I keep bringing it back to the region, but I think that's really important, because devolving power about these crucial issues is how we're going to solve a lot of them. We've had £50 million devolved to support people back into work and training who have got physical and mental health barriers to work. I think as long as we are able to put the support in place to help people get back into work, then change needs to happen, because it's very clear that it's not working as it is now. But we need to make sure that support's in place. So I'm really pleased that we're able to pilot some of that work. I want to see it expand. Some of the things that we're supporting people with, such as quicker access to mental health support, better opportunities to learn new skills, and all of those things, they will be transformational, particularly if we do them in a very targeted way.
Well, Kim, thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you in 8 years with a giant pair of scissors and a giant ribbon on the first metro trip to Washington.
Well, I look forward to welcoming you, but I feel like you should probably get on the metro before that.
I think I probably will. Yeah, I think I probably will. But Kim, thank you very much.
You're welcome in the region anytime. Bring Newscast with you. Thank you.
So, Chris, just that political hoo-ha that's going on today about whose money this is. Because the Conservatives are basically saying, "Oh, we were going to do this anyway."
Yeah, so there's a bit of that, and that to a degree is inevitable up to a point, because there are certain things that were kind of in the pipeline that if an incoming government quite likes the look of, then you kind of carry on with. There's another bit of internal Labour politics going on here, which is announcing this in advance of the spending review. As somebody described it to me today in government, so that Rachel Reeves can have an element of, if you like, her paw prints upon it, as opposed to it being purely projects kind of in the name of mayors like Kim McGuinness and others. So there's an element of seeking to bank political credit. Rachel Reeves would make the argument that why on earth shouldn't she, given that she is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So there's a fair element of that going on as well.
And Faisal, this is just always the difficulty with comparing different political parties and different governments' capital spending plans, because you're talking about, well, the war on grafts is here already a week early. You're talking about spending plans in the future, and also theoretical spending plans in a parallel future that doesn't exist.
So remember at the time of the budget, so last October, there was a graph. I don't think we need to declare war on it, but it was very interesting.
I know whose side you'd be on in the war on grafts, by the way.
It was
scrupulously neutral.
It was the PSNI, Public Sector Net Investment Chart, and typically that has been it's been around 2-ish% of GDP, and it was being cut under the previous government's plans, and it was really quite a significant bump, like closer to 3%. It was 2.7, 2.6, 2.7% of GDP at the end. So that was essentially £100 billion boost over 5 years. That was, and I think I remember on 10 o'clock news I said, what's in that? That is very interesting. Now, the process we've had under the Chief Secretary, Darren Jones, is that he's apparently been going through all of these infrastructure projects as part of a strategy, an infrastructure strategy. Now, we didn't get that today. We got these individual projects related to mayoral areas, which, as Chris says, the Chancellor wanted to put her sort of fingerprints over. The bigger project, actually. So these are very important projects. Things like the extension of, let's take a step back. It's not a revelation to say that the UK metro areas, so big cities, massively underperforms or under indexes on these sorts of transport networks. You go to Spain, you go to Germany, you go to France, and the number 5, number 6, number 7 city has an amazing metro system. We don't have that. And they announced a bit more in that direction today. So this stuff is important for local labour markets. It's important for local economies. What this wasn't was sort of mega infrastructure projects of the sort that could transform economic geography and growth. The big one is going to be this Liverpool to Manchester kind of high-speed line that already had, I think, £16 billion allocated to it, sort of, from the cancellation of the HS2 Phase 2, right? What is going on?
The northern bit of HS2.
And what is going on? And some of it's the same line, right?
Yeah.
What is going on with that is that going to be the big announcement next Wednesday? We've already seen Andy Burnham, as occasionally happens with the Mayor of Greater Manchester, sort of start to kind of, stoke up.
It's going to be a steam railway, is it?
Well, I don't think it. Well, obviously, it's famously where Stephenson's rocket. Sorry, not literally on the same line, but so I remember, and you're absolutely right to point to previous plans. You remember when HS2 was cancelled, we had that extraordinary document that someone in the industry described to me as the advisor to Rishi Sunak having sort of rustled up with a map in a crate.
And it was a big list of other infrastructure projects that were going to be funded to make up for the loss of HS2.
Yeah, and some of the stations, I can't remember, they didn't exist, or they'd already...
And it was
already got... They would have got a Metrolink station there, or something.
And it was called Network North, but lots of the projects were in the south.
All that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So this is a lot more sort of calmly thought out, as you'd expect. I'd expect these projects to be delivered. I think you won't get people riding on them paying tickets, but you'll definitely get tram lines being built by the time of the next election, if that's what they're concerned with. But there's a big question here, which is about the sense of ambition and vision this government has after, I think we could suggest dispassionately, a stuttering start in some over the past year. The next 2 or 3 weeks, I think, is really important for them. I don't know if you call it a reboot politically, but in just setting out a vision, not just to voters, but actually to the whole rest of the world. They have this mantra now that the economy is the fastest growing as it was in Q1. They've had these 3 trade deals. There is an opportunity now, between now and the 1-year anniversary of this government, to set out an industrial strategy, a trade strategy, an infrastructure strategy, and a spending review that could show some momentum. I'm not sure we're going to get that, but I think that the time is ripe for them to show some energy and ambition.
Couple of things to chip in on. So I think we're going to get the infrastructure stuff within a couple of weeks,
which is a 10-year infrastructure plan.
Yeah, and the industrial strategy perhaps the week after that. On the specifics of the Manchester-Liverpool rail line, the first 2 questions at Rachel Reeves' event in Rochdale today came from BBC Radio Manchester and from the Manchester Evening News, both about that. And I thought the way the Chancellor ducked it was quite revealing. She said this is about the mayoral related announcements, and the other stuff will come later, which seemed to point towards that being pretty likely, I would have thought, next week.
And Chris, a few other things that popped up in the Q&A with Rachel Reeves. She was asked about restoring the winter fuel payment, or at least giving it to more pensioners. And she said, we will, as a government, increase the threshold for the means test, meaning that more people will be eligible for it, which I suppose answers part of the riddle about what they were going to do. Because there was an alternative world where they maybe gave it back to everybody, but if you were a certain tax rate payer, you had to then do a tax return and send it back.
Yeah, so this is a sort of slow motion U-turn in 3 or 4 parts. So part 1 was a fortnight ago with the, they are going to look at it and change it. Part 2 today was to say that this is about moving the threshold up. In other words, millionaires aren't going to get it back, but we don't know what the threshold will be yet. And we do know that the change will happen for this coming winter. So they were the 2 new facts today. But the only fact really that a newscaster wants the answer to, if you are a recipient or were a recipient of the winter fuel payment, is will I get it back again? Answer, we don't know yet, because we don't know where the threshold is going to be. A couple of weeks ago, we were told we would find out the answer to that question, in fact all of the questions, at a quote-unquote fiscal event. And the suggestion then was that the spending review was not a fiscal event. The language from Rachel Reeves today was that this change will happen as soon as possible. And that seemed to be hinting at and pointing towards next week, although they are not, they're not sort of nailing their colours to that particular mast yet definitively.
And Faisal, you're scoffing, as you scoffed 2 weeks ago when me and Chris tried to explain that the government was not calling next week the spending review a fiscal event, so therefore they wouldn't be doing their winter fuel change then.
Yeah.
You're scoffing still.
No, well, and I said it was an event that seemed pre-fiscal to me. But I had the conversation, obviously they got to me later, where they said, no, dear Faisal, this is not a fiscal event. And I was like, hang on. I've definitely, it's been anyway, whatever.
Yeah.
That's all. So my sense is, so that there's a separate and arcane process now where if this move costs a certain amount of money, you would then have to get the OBR involved. This was the change they made to the fiscal sort of some sub part of the fiscal.
Yeah,
rules.
basically, if it's a change to benefits or taxation above a certain level and it's permanent, it gets referred to the OBR for a verdict.
Who will then have to. So I don't know. I my gut feeling is, I guess the optics of this sort of maybe some of the numbers in the spending review will be so grim that they want to offer a bit back. It just sort of changed the dynamics and optics of this whole stuff, of this whole process. Maybe they want to do it outside of that event. I don't know about the tactics here. It all looks slightly messy. It's not it's a tanker, sort of slow chugging tanker turning around very slowly. Some of the arguments they made in favour of this move, which they made, very sort of passionately and took a lot of political heat for, they just don't apply anymore. It really does depend where they move the threshold to, how much it costs. You then have this complication about the fact that the pension tax credit isn't being claimed still by hundreds of thousands of people who are eligible, and therefore they're not.
Because that's your way into getting winter fuel payment.
Exactly. So it's all still a bit complicated, and then you've got the 2-child limit in the backdrop too, which is obviously under significant pressure. I'm intrigued to know what the vibe is from you guys amongst the backbenchers who have been quite mute.
Yeah, I think on winter fuel, if they can cobble together working out what the threshold is going to be in time for next week, the political advantage for them of being able to announce it next week is that it is a thing that kind of travels, because, wherever you're watching or listening or reading stuff about the, winter fuel payment, then if you are eligible, then you'll be getting it back, etc., etc. And is a sort of easier story to tell, if you like, than some of the more granular Whitehall budget stuff that will otherwise, perhaps get a greater amount of attention. But finding that threshold is not necessarily easy, and then working out the consequences of the costs of that, as you say, Faisal, not necessarily easy either. But I think shifting from the next fiscal event and branding that as the thing in the autumn, i.e. the budget, to a phrase that says as soon as possible, implies a fast forwarding, I think.
Right, we've got our money's worth out of you two, but just quickly before we go, Faisal, just confirm for us, Donald Trump overnight increased the tariffs on steel and aluminium imports coming into the US. Is the UK exempt because of our trade deal that's not a trade deal that's actually not been implemented or actually fully agreed yet?
So we're exempt from the further increase that was announced yesterday from 25 to 50. We still haven't quite ironed out the details of the deal. And what was new was the possibility that if those details aren't sorted out by July the 9th, then the 50 could, in theory, apply to
the
us.
UK.
So it's sort of, which was like, oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
So you can play that both ways, and we saw that at BMQs. I think in reality, we have been treated better than the rest of the world as a result of the deal. Why they're sort of why the Americans are trying to sort of hang something over us till July the 9th when they're at the same time trying to do a series of deals with the rest of the world. It's not a great look at. It's not what you would have wanted. And whether they're trying
if
to
you're
pressurize,
on the pro-graph side of the world.
No, but whether they're trying to pressurize. So there's still some news there, right? Is the US side trying to pressurize the UK on some detail that we're going to have to give way on before July the 9th? There could be further. We watch that space.
To be continued. Faisal, thank you very much.
Great to be here.
And Chris, thanks to you too.
Ta-ra.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. We'll be back with another one very soon. Bye-bye.